Most of these abandoned and forgotten cities bring out fear and anxiety. With no one living there, the abandoned houses quietly decay in the middle of their uninhabited wastelands. These are cities met with hardships, destroyed by wars, fires, and earthquakes. Beauty aside, there are places in Italy that will give you the creeps. One of them is the island in the Venetian lagoon called Poveglia. The island became infamous during the times of the plague. In the Middle Ages, during this terrible epidemic, Poveglia became a quarantine zone for patients. People from northern Italy were brought there, doomed to perish. Whole families were forced there. Sometimes not all of the family members were even infected. People who died on the island were thrown into plague pits and their bodies burned. At that time, about 160,000 people died from the plague on Poveglia. The reputation the island had already established became even more horrifying when in 1922 a mental hospital was opened there where the chief doctor conducted monstrous experiments on patients. Later, the doctor committed suicide by jumping off the bell tower. It is believed that the history of this island served as the inspiration for Dennis Lehan's book called Shutter Island. The inspiration behind the horrific town of Silent Hill was the city of Centralia, which is located in the state of Pennsylvania. The city was founded in 1841. The main occupation of local residents was in the coal and anthracite mining industry. Coal mining continued up until the 1960s, but then most of the companies went out of business. As a result, the mines started to gradually get abandoned. On May 1962, the Centralia City Council hired 5 volunteer firefighters to clean up the city's garbage dump, located in an abandoned open pit near the Oddfellow Cemetery. Firefighters set garbage heaps ablaze, allowing them to burn for some time and then extinguish them. But because the fire was not fully extinguished, pieces of burning debris began to smolder, and eventually the fire spread through a hole in the mine and carried to other abandoned coal mines near Centralia. Attempts to extinguish the fire were unsuccessful. Over time, people began to complain about deteriorating health caused by carbon monoxide emission. The smell of the burning began to spread more and more throughout the city. The city began to turn into a huge and deadly hot plate. In 1984, Congress allocated more than $42 million to prepare and organize the relocation of its citizens. By 1992, Centralia was almost completely empty. To this day, some of the underground mines are still burning and will continue to for about 250 more years. Rocks, stones, and empty houses hide the wails and cries of pain from hundreds of patients imprisoned on the Greek island of Spinalonga. After the declaration of Greece's independence, this island was under the control of the Turks for a long time. To drive them off the island, the Greeks decided to resort to a ploy. They gathered lepers from all over the country and sent them on ships to the island. Fearing the contagious disease, the Turks fled. The lepers were taken by boat to the island, and they stayed there forever, separated from their families, children, relatives, and friends. So the leper colony formed. Later, leprosy patients were brought here from all over Europe. There was no food or fresh water on the island, so everything was brought from the villages of Plaka and Yolanda. If a leper woman did give birth to a healthy child, it was taken away and given to an orphanage on Crete. The leper colony existed on the island until 1957, retaining the title of one of the most frightening places in its history. Of course, there are no longer lepers on the island now, but still, no one lives on it to this day. In the south of Italy, in the province of Basilicata, there is a place that has been omitted from all the tourist guides for more than half a century, but still it's widely known around the world. The medieval city of Krakow merges with the rock on which it is located, and it appears like something out of an artwork carved by a sculptor. Every building and tower made of stone. The history of Krakow began in the 18th century, although there are very few official historical documents confirming this. According to some research, the settlement was founded by the Greeks, far from major trade routes. Originally, the city was supposed to become a reliable shelter from sea robbers and numerous wars of the Middle Ages. True to its purpose, Krakow has lived through many things: plague, war, and devastation, but it was powerless against nature. In 1963, an earthquake caused serious damage, destroying many homes. Residents began to gradually leave the city, fearing subsequent earthquakes. Officially, no Italian travel agencies take responsibility for tours to Krakow and its surrounding areas. On June 10, 1944, the small French town of Oradour-sur-Glane suffered a terrible fate. Nazi troops burned the city down along with its inhabitants. Early in the morning, the city was just waking up when 150 SS soldiers surrounded it. They say that the fascists demanded residents to give up any possible resistance fighters being sheltered there. When they got no response, the SS men took action. Residents of the city were taken to barns and shot at the legs. When victims could no longer move, the Nazis doused them with fuel and set the barns on fire. Women and children were herded into a church, which was also set on fire. Those who tried to escape through windows and doors were met with machine gun fire. Only 47-year-old Margaret Raffanche, who jumped out of the back window of a vestry, was lucky enough to survive. In the span of a few hours, 642 civilians were killed in Oradour-sur-Glane, 190 men, 247 women, and 205 children. Authorities decided not to restore the city, but leave it as it was after the fascists moved on. In 1945, the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane were added to the list of historical monuments in France. The French built a new Oradour-sur-Glane in the immediate vicinity of the destroyed one. There is hardly a single person in the world who does not know about the tragic history of the city Pripet. The young and promising city appeared on the map in 1970 to house people who built it and then worked at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Residential buildings, movie theaters, cultural centers, the Pioneers Palace, sports complexes, and recreational parks were built at a rapid pace. People from all over the Soviet Union were traveling to the promising new city for work and to start their new lives. The average person's age there was only 26 years. Every year, more than 1,000 children were born in Pripet. So, great care was given to constructing kindergartens and schools. The city was considered model, exemplary. By the mid-80s, almost 50,000 people lived in Pripet. On April 26, 1986, at 1:30 in the morning, an explosion rocked the city that occurred at the 4th unit of the nuclear power plant. A huge radioactive cloud covered Pripet. On April 27th, at 11 a.m., residents were told to immediately evacuate. They were only allowed to take their documents and some food with them. Now, for more than 30 years since the explosion, no one has lived in Pripet. But the city, of course, attracts the attention of tourists and thrill seekers. However, it is dangerous to stay in it for a long time because of the high levels of radiation. In China, near Shanghai, there is a city that exists and appears as an exact copy of Paris. It even has its own Eiffel Tower, however, almost 3 times smaller than the original, only about 360 feet. There is also a smaller copy of the Champs-Élysées and the Luxembourg Gardens. In the city of Tianducheng, even some residential buildings are built as a copy of expensive houses in the center of Paris. This is another young city in our top 10 list. It was built in 2007 and is considered a ghost town since almost no one lives in it. Developers were counting on rich and affluent buyers from Shanghai, but housing prices in Tianducheng were unreasonably high, even for the wealthy, $4,000 to $6,000 for 1 square yard. Also, the city has absolutely no developed infrastructure. Because the city is not interesting to tourists, luxury hotels also remain empty. Now, poor citizens and the military temporarily live in the city, mostly on the outskirts. The city that was given the name White Dome at the beginning of the 18th century is now called the Caucasian Hiroshima. Aghdam is a monument to the brutal war for the territory of the unrecognized Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. Before the Karabakh War, which took place in 1991 through 1994, the city had factories producing butter, wine, canned goods, hardware, and tools along a highway junction, a railway station, theaters, and various educational institutions. Aghdam became the scene of fierce battles during the Karabakh War. In early June in 1993, the Armenian armed forces launched an offensive on the Aghdam to capture the city. By July 5th, the city was surrounded by Karabakh Armenians, who shelled it with artillery and grad installations, and then they ordered to burn Aghdam down to the ground. Citizens fleeing for their lives left the city forever. Today, the ghost of Aghdam is a buffer zone between Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan. Verrocchio was once the most popular resort on Cyprus. Celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor and Brigitte Bardot vacationed there. The 4-kilometer-long beach was built up with brand new hotels, nightclubs, shops, markets, and expensive private villas. But come 1974, there was a military coup in Cyprus, formed by Greek nationalists. The Turkish army invaded the island in response to the political upheaval in the country, and the Greeks living in Verrocchio had to leave the city in a hurry. Within 24 hours, the city was empty, and not a soul was left. Since then, they have been forbidden to return to the city. Today, Verrocchio is a memorial to the civil war that divided the once binational Cyprus into two ethnic halves. In the Okinsky district of the Sakhalin region is the northern village of Kolenda, which was founded in 1963 for the development of an oil field. Kolenda got its name from a nearby lake. Unfortunately, there is little to no information about Kolenda available to us now. All we know is that about 5,000 people live there. In total, there were about 10 4- or 5-story houses, some private buildings, a large club, a fire station, a store, a kindergarten, and a school. Everything changed the night of May 28, 1995, when a powerful earthquake occurred in the north of Sakhalin. The main impact of the disaster fell on the village of Neftgorsk, which is completely destroyed along with other northern settlements. One of the most affected villages was Kolenda. An investigation was done on the housing, and it was found that most of the buildings in the village were already unfit for living. The locals left the settlement for good. Now there is almost nothing left of Kolenda. A couple of destroyed houses and construction debris completely overgrown with tall grass. Ghost cities are scattered all over the planet, silently keeping their secrets and falling into desolation. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.